1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 2? 7 minus 2. 6 times 4. Maybe I should have 7 times 3. That's football season math, right? So math kind of always adds up. 1 plus 1 is always 2. And we have different kinds of math, right? You got addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, geometry, algebra, calculus. And one of the beautiful things about math is you could be here or on the other side of the world, and 1 plus 1 is always 2, right? And math describes our world and is built into the creation in ways that are wonderful. So math always adds up. Does life always add up? It does not. Today we hear a story where some Sadducees who do not believe in resurrection come to Jesus. And they ask a question about resurrection, but they don't believe in resurrection, so they probably aren't really trying to get, an actual answer. What I think is happening more so is that Jesus does not add up for them. At the end of the passage, there's this little bit that says they wouldn't ask him any more questions because they got this sense that he was speaking with authority. And that's something that's said throughout the Gospels. Jesus will show up someplace and teach, and it tells us that he did so as one who had authority. He could heal people. He could cast out demons. And there's another passage where they say to him, clearly what you were doing is something that would come from God. So on the one hand, all of these people see Jesus and see someone that's powerful and holy and seems to be someone doing the work of God. But he also eats with sinners and tax collectors, which he really should not do. And he goes and hangs out with Samaritan women at the well and the Canaanite woman. He hangs out with people he shouldn't be hanging out with. He lets his disciples pick grain on the Sabbath when they're not supposed to do that. He heals people on the Sabbath. He touches people he's not supposed to touch. And clearly, if he was a man of God, he would not do any of that. So on the one hand, he obviously seems to be someone who can do the things that God would equip him to do. But on the other hand, he's breaking all the rules. And for them, that doesn't add up. It doesn't add up in their understanding of faith. It does not add up in their understanding of the law. And so Jesus doesn't add up, and they need to then get rid of him. So they ask him this question that grows out of human logic. Right? 7 different spouses for this woman, and because of their law, as each one of them died without children, she would marry the next brother. And so they want to know, you can only have one husband if you're a woman. The math doesn't just quite add up, so if you can only have one, which one's it going to be? Now, I want to be hard on the Sadducees and say, gosh, they don't think Jesus adds up. Here they are testing him. But I'm not sure we think Jesus adds up all that much. Some days we hear Jesus say that we should love our neighbor. Are we good with that one? When Jesus says to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, maybe not so much, right? We don't want that one to add up. When Jesus says, hey, you should feed some hungry people and clothe some naked people. And then he says, that one's okay, but when he says, give away everything you have to the poor and then follow me, we kind of go, well, that doesn't add up all the way because we have bills and things like that. So I'm not sure we always either believe that Jesus adds up. And part of what they are bringing to him is the law, right? And when we think of the law or the things that bring order to our lives, we also don't like it when that doesn't add up. And we don't always point it at Jesus, though. Often we point it at other people. We recently switched cable companies, right? Cable, internet, telephone we have. We originally had promotional pricing. That was pretty good. And then after a year it went up. One year it went up 3 consecutive months. And every year it keeps going up. And all the while that's happening, another cable company sends people to my door and says, hey, do you want to switch? And mostly I think it's all a racket, so why would I bother? But at some point this year, finally, the difference between my increased price and the promotional price at the other one was too much to ignore. But it's kind of a pain to change. So I called the current company that we had and said, hey, and they said, you've been a customer for 10 years. Thank you for your loyalty. And I said, okay, well, somebody keeps knocking on my door and why would I stay with you? And they didn't have an answer for that. And so I look and say, for 10 years, I've been loyal to you, and all you do is raise my prices, decrease my channels, and give me worse customer service. And now you're going to give somebody else that's brand new a cheaper price. Does that add up? No. Not for me. Does it add up when I went to the new company and I'm the one getting the cheaper price? Yes, right? Whether or not it adds up really comes down to how we see it from our perspective. How many of you are siblings? Did you ever have an encounter where it was not fair that you got in trouble when your sibling didn't? Does that add up? No. Did your parents ever tell you, do so because I said so, not because what I do? Does that add up? No, right? So we just kind of get used to things adding up, but all of that grows out of our perspective. And sometimes it really is dollars and cents math that doesn't add up. I would pretty well guarantee that amongst our gathering this morning, I could find a number of you that would say, I pay my taxes, and it does not add up that welfare and Medicaid and food stamps go to people who aren't willing to work hard like I did to earn my money. And you'll say, that doesn't add up. And I'm equally certain that there are people in this room who would say, I earn my money and pay my taxes, and it doesn't add up that my taxes went up when a billionaire's taxes went down. That doesn't add up. And I bet there's people in the middle that would say neither one of those things add up. And so we have, right, from our own perspectives, how these things don't add up. But then there's other things that I don't know if our perspective is any different for any of us. Does gun violence in our culture add up? Does poverty? Does just the brokenness of humanity and the way we treat each other all the time add up? It doesn't. So as we look at these Sadducees who come to Jesus because he does not add up, and they're going to ask him a human logic question, right, to trick him, we do the same things all the time in our own ways. Now, they come to Jesus with a human logic question that even has a little marriage math, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Which one is going to be the husband? Does Jesus answer their question? Not the way they want to, right? Because Jesus is not using human math and human logic. He's using resurrection math. Resurrection math works different. So when Jesus answers the question, he looks at them and says, wrong math, right? We are not operating in the things of this world. What the Sadducees were trying to do was use human understandings of a broken world and apply it to something that's divine. And Jesus says, no, the math is different. In the resurrection, people aren't given in marriage, and they don't marry. And everyone is a beloved child of God like the angels. But this is where this passage, for me, takes a surprising turn. Jesus starts to talk about resurrection math and how it works. And I would think that the next thing that he would do is point to the future. He does it with the disciples. He looks at them and says, I am going to die, and 3 days later, I'm going to rise. And when I rise, right, that's when things are going to change. That's what I would think Jesus would tell these Sadducees. Listen, you're operating with human math. Resurrection math works different. In resurrection math, I die. 3 days later, when I'm good and dead, I'm going to rise, and everything is going to be different. But that's not what Jesus does. What he does is point back, and it's actually astonishing to me what he says. He says, you remember Moses at the burning bush? Who looked at God and said, this is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He says that is about resurrection. That those people aren't dead because they're all alive to God. So Jesus doesn't look forward to a resurrection that will come, but he looks backward and says resurrection has always been a thing. And that God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. And if God is the God of the living for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and Moses, is God the God of the living for the woman who died after 7 husbands, didn't have children? Yes. And everyone from then all the way up to now. So, yes, Jesus died and was raised, and we talk about that new life as a gift, but what Jesus is saying is that that's where God's always been. God's always been doing resurrection math. God has always been the God of the living, and that's not just about heavenly spaces, but about the world that we live in today. And the world that the Sadducees lived in. And this resurrection math that works different, I believe in it because I have seen it. I once stood with a woman whose daughter had been murdered years before, and she had gone on a journey of faith to ask that the death penalty be taken off the table. And it was clear in conversation with her that she had gotten to a place of forgiveness and peace. Does that add up in our world logic? Does it add up in resurrection math? It does, because God is the God of the living. I had a coworker whose home life was not great. He would work long hours not to go home. And at one point he got a promotion and a raise. And after some number of months, he went and he asked for a demotion and a pay cut. Does that work in our world math? Who does that? Right? And his family life wasn't even great. And he was an atheist, he would tell you. But I would say that in that experience, right, resurrection math was at work. Because our normal math doesn't work that way, and something was happening in him that caused him to start making different choices where I think the God of the living was touching his life. My grandma was, we did not know that she was going to die 6 months later, but when my mom died, my grandma was there with us, and I looked at her, and I said, "How you doing, Grandma?" She had had cancer on her colon, her kidney, and her adrenal gland, and over a period of about 18 months had had surgery after surgery and drugs and everything else to get rid of all that. And she looked at me and she said, "I feel great, but I have cancer on my liver, and I wouldn't know I was sick if the doctor hadn't told me." And I said, "Okay, well then what?" And she said, "I'm tired of having surgery, and I'm tired of feeling like garbage, so I'm just going to live whatever days I got. And if that's a bunch of years, fine. And if it's a bunch of days, that's fine too." Does that add up in our human math? Not at all, but that is 100% resurrection math. And my cousin let us all know when she was getting close. And normally when somebody's pretty close to death, you're not going to have a conversation with them. But I was able to call my grandma and just blunt matter of fact, she said, "I got something hard to tell you." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "I'm ready to go." That's resurrection math, right? She was living, because the God of the living does resurrection math. This happens around us all the time. People that have addictions get yanked out of it by God's grace and put on 2 feet in a different kind of place. People that have been in marriages that are failing come back from the brink. Now, it doesn't happen every single time. We see plenty of brokenness that just keeps getting lived out. But often we are looking with regular math, right? Our human math. And we should pay attention to human math, right? Like if your gas tank tells you you only got so many miles left, you should pay attention to that. Regular math is what balances our textbooks, but I've also seen resurrection math work on finances, so I wouldn't go too far with that one. But right around us all the time, we use our human logic and our human math when resurrection math is right here for us. Jesus has already given it to us, and the God of the living is around us, just equipping us with grace each and every day. So may we be blessed to go out into the world as resurrection mathematicians, looking for the God of the living, even amongst the things of the dead, trusting that we will find that God and that God will use us to touch the lives of others as we go. Amen.